Well, good evening and welcome to all comrades. We're going to start now. My name's Ed Potts. I'm going to be chairing tonight's discussion. We're discussing the goings on and fallout and development and what we can learn from what happened at Labour Party conference just recently. We're going to have two contributions from regular participants of the Talking About Socialism group. First off, we're going to have Will McMahon, and then Janet Sillett is going to give her contribution as well. For those who this is your first time attending one of these discussions, welcome. We've been having them for about 6 months now, over 6 months, and they happen once a fortnight. So this one, obviously tonight, Labour Party conference, and I'll tell you a bit more about what's coming up in our schedule towards the end of the meeting. So a bit of housekeeping first of all. The meeting is being recorded. It should also be live streamed to Facebook and YouTube as well. So by all means, just to make you aware of that, and by all means, if there's anybody who you think might have been interested in the discussion but couldn't make it tonight, there will be a link circulated with the video recording uploaded, and it's a good place to engage in the discussion, watch it back, and share it with others as well. So in terms of the format of tonight, what we tend to do is have a contribution in total lasting around 15 minutes at the start of the meeting. As I said, that's going to be Will and Janet tonight. And then there's going to be contributions from the floor. We're quite strict with timings, and the reason for that is not to cut anybody short, but it's to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be heard. And I'll prioritise calling in people who haven't spoken yet, but there will be more than enough time for everybody to make a contribution, ask a question, contribute to the discussion, and hopefully there'll be time for another go round. We're going to be finishing at 9 tonight, so about 15 minutes before the end. Of course, I'll give Will and Janet some time to sum up the discussion and respond to points that have been made. If you would like to make a contribution, please use the Zoom virtual hand. If you don't know how to do that, it should be at the bottom of your screen under reactions, and then raise hand. But if you really can't do it, give me a wave on your camera with your actual hand, and I will do my best to look out for you and call you in to speak. Right, so without further ado, I'm going to ask Will McMahon to kick off tonight's discussion.
Thanks very much, Ed. This is kind of my first reaction to the Labour Party conference, and I'm going to do my best to discuss my first impressions rather than what Marxists should do about it on this occasion. And that's something that we'll be discussing in our next session in a fortnight. In a way, this is a bit like carrying out an autopsy, looking at what remains of Corbynism. And I think the answer being not very much. Even the votes on railway and energy nationalisation were quite quickly trod underfoot as soon as they were taken. A clear message to capital that Labour is safe to govern. Being safe for capital is what Starmer, it sums Starmer up really, and there is no way of polishing what we all have to admit is a bit of a political turd, although as we know, someone did try to throw some glitter on it. It's years since I listened to the news quiz on Radio 4, but one of the comedians on the show last week suggested that rather than Labour pursuing the audacity of hope, they represent the audacity of beige. So he said, so what do we want? Slow but steady improvement of public services. When do we want it? In the fullness of time. How do we want it? Subject to terms and conditions. Now, actually, in one way, I wish that were the case, but I fear what we will witness will be far, far worse. I seem to remember Labour's election slogan in 2005 was forward, not back. And what I expect from Labour, if it were to win power, is totally back to the structure of a society that is a free welfare state. And I think if you look at the housing policy, this is one area that really, really reflects this, actually. The house builders and those who invest in the housing market have been in charge of housing since at least 1992. Blairism did nothing to reverse this trend, and they have won the day. Council housing is more or less a dead letter now, as Starmer's housing plan is a combination of a reassertion of the homeowner strategy combined with a push for further deregulation to meet notional housing targets. There were two key phrases that were used by Renner and Starmer. One was, the first was affordable housing. They're going to build affordable housing, but what we know about the term affordable housing is that it's 80% of the market rate, and for most working class people, completely unaffordable. And the second key phrase was YIMBY, yes in my backyard, used by Starmer in his speech as a positive statement and in opposition to NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Now, as Glyn Robbins explains in a recent article in the Morning Star, and Glyn is an expert in this field, the YIMBY versus NIMBY conflict has been festering on social media for some time. It's not new, but assumes more significance when it's taken up by somebody who is going to be potentially the next Prime Minister. For decades, libertarian Tories have argued that the best way to meet housing need is to allow new homes to be built with a minimum of interference. YIMBYism has always been actively promoted by the property developers and its lobbyists. Their argument is that only by dramatically accelerating new development can we provide the affordable homes that are so desperately needed. We have now decades of evidence that shows allowing private developers, including corporate housing associations, to lead housing delivery doesn't work. But homelessness has soared. So have the profits of the big house builders, reaching 7 billion in the last 2 years. So my assumption is that there won't be much difference between the Tory and Labour government housing policy after 2024. Rather than back to the future, as Labour spin doctors want us to think, instead we will go forward to the past, a housing market that looks like it did in the first part of the 20th century, an infinitesimally small amount of council housing, an ever-growing private rental sector, and I include social housing in this, with an ever-growing rental price that squeezed and subdued the working class, and a home-owning sector that the middle class occupy via inherited wealth. In other words, our housing will have the shape that was bequeathed to the 20th century by the Victorian period. If we look at the progress of politics in British history since the rise of the type of Labour movement that produced the Labour Party, I think this conference does represent a moment of transition back to the pre-World War I Liberal-Labour alliance that Blair so wanted to return to. The response of the left at the party conference was feeble. Stage management muted most criticism, and the orchestrated standing ovation for Starmer a reminder of Stalinism, the front bench clapping in a game of who was chicken enough to stop clapping first. The fringes do not seem to have been much better from the reports that I've read. A main fringe of the world transformed focused on a strategy to respond to Starmer was led by Neil Lawson of Compass, Jeremy Gilbert, who writes for Compass and The Guardian and The New Statesman, Shami Chakrabarti, who I think at best is a left liberal, and John McDonnell. The main aim being seemed to stitch up a permanent alliance between the soft and hard left. It is hard to see how any of these points of view can offer a socialist strategy to resist Starmer. McDonnell's main advice being, now is the time to bite your tongue, and encouraging people to read The Art of War. According to a report from Caden Jones in the Alliance for Workers' Liberty newspaper, not a paper I often quote, most of the left of the world transformed seemed utterly disillusioned and disorganised. This is unsurprising, is it not? A huge blow has been delivered to the Labour left and socialism in the Labour Party. The defeat of Bennism in the early 1980s was followed by the defeat of Kinnockism and the political dominance of Thatcherism. Blairism's defeat of the post-Bennite left was delivered in government through a social and economic policies framed by a growing economy and bolstered by a private sector through new public management. With Starmer, we are heading for the privatisation of health and housing, the two bedrocks of the 1945 settlement, with only a promise of spending should growth permit it. And given their focus on neoliberal economics and the size of the national debt, this is unlikely to be soon, if at all. Given all of this, following the Labour conference, the question is it as bad as it looks? My answer to this is yes, and probably worse. And I'm not even sure that Labour will win.
Thanks very much, Will. That will be an interesting one, won't it? Whether the polls are giving an inflated sense of optimism for Labour, but we'll have to wait and see. So next we have a contribution from Janet. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay, thanks. Well, there were no big surprises. There were no new ideas. And as well as just said, even the big so-called big announcements didn't actually represent any change in direction. And actually, some of them were very old ideas. The new towns, I think the Tories actually came up with this idea for new towns, which collapsed. I don't think any of them happened. And as was said, the so-called bonanza in new housing is a developer and landowner charter. So there's been no lessons learned, really. But of course, we know that. But I think there were some other points of note about the nature of Labour seen through the lens of the conference. And I would say especially the wholesale corporate capture of the party, which is now complete, seems to me. Of the attendees to the conference, 28% were from business, 22% from party members, 3% from trade unions. So business, corporate business sponsored events, paid to speak at fringe meetings. We're talking about, Boeing, Airbus, Amazon, and so on. But apart, as well as those people, there were a presence of right-wing policy think tanks. The Adam Smith Institute, you can hardly get more right-wing than them, spoke at an event. They boasted that one of the Labour lords was about to become one of their patrons. They praised Starmer's speech to the hilt. And Starmer said, at one point, business will be coming into government with us, which for those of you who remember, could have been mocking Corbyn and MacDonald, who did say, I think at one point, if we win, it will be you that comes into government with us. That is the Labour movement. I just wanted to talk a bit more about the state of the Labour left. Actually, we could talk about that in 1 second, because its state, it seems to me, is dead. But how is that reflected? We know it's dead, but how was it reflected more but in this conference? So in the constituency section, Labour, well, I think the trade unions had a vote for this as well, I'm not sure. But Labour First got all its motions chosen in the priority ballot. And the fringe, from what, not being at the conference, it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on, but there was very little online. There was very little about large rallies. The LRC, I used to go to the LRC rally. It was always actually the best one. I don't think they had a rally at all, which is not surprising, because for those of you who know the LRC, it seems to me it's actually deceased as a meaningful left-wing group. Tribune, I don't think they had a rally. The campaign group, reflecting what Will said, had a rally called Socialist Solutions to the Tory Crisis. So they're focusing on, how they're going to provide these solutions if Labour win. And of course, they're in denial because they're not going to. Some of the so-called Labour left MPs, including Richard Bergen, but also Whittam, Lewis, who I don't think are left-wing anyway, but as soon as the conference was over, we're tweeting, this was a great conference, we need a general election now. And outside the conference hall, well, what was happening? Not much. I mean, there was the For the Many group, lots of enthusiasm, I think, at the launch, but no real possibility, I don't think, of them making any difference. It's kind of like enough is enough, minus the trade unions. So basically, there's been no progress or development from the 2017-19 manifesto. There are no emerging leaders on the left, and the trade unions are marginalized. So is this business as usual? Are we going back to pre-Corbyn? And I think the answer to that is a bit more complex than yes or no. I think it's both. And we know the context, so, is very different. The left is very weak, the trade unions are weakened, and the state of the economy. But if we look at privatisation, economic policy, seems to me it's very similar to Blair in terms of I don't think they'll call it PFI, but public-private partnerships to provide any sort of infrastructure development. And privatisation is clearly on the cards in whatever form. So the rhetoric around this, it's a further retreat from even Keynesianism. And of course, we're starting from a much lower base, given the state of the economy and 13 years of what's happened with the Tories. So it's actually worse than Blair, which is hard to conceive for those of us who fought the privatisations that Blair came up with. I think Starmer is definitely more authoritarian internally and regarding the world itself. The greater stranglehold on the conference agenda, what is allowed to be debated, and so on. And the kind of Braverman-like messaging, I think, is different to Blair. And I think Starmer is less liberal. I mean, not in a neoliberal sense, but in a kind of progressive social policy sense. I think he is increasingly because of opportunism. And we all know about foreign policy. We don't have to spell that out this week at all. It seems to me Starmer actually, though, isn't afraid of the left anymore, but he is afraid of perceptions. He's of optics. He's afraid. He doesn't want anything to stop his messages being distorted by anyone from the left in terms of the media and business. And also, I think what is different to Blair, to Kinnock, Blair, and so on, is the kind of scale and depth of the purge. It's much, much deeper than it was then. And they don't want to ever make a mistake and get somebody like Corbyn there again. And that's not just optics. They clearly mean that. So I think just to sum that up, really, there are some words that come to mind about this conference that were repeated ad nauseum. Aspiration, enterprise, growth, working families, country before party. Total rubbish, of course, because everything Starmer does is about him and the party. And what words are out? Well, equality, redistribution, class. So I think to kind of sum that up, it's a mix, it's a kind of weird mix of Blairism, Blair and Blue Labour, when you're looking at social policy and immigration. But on top of that, there's a layer of authoritarianism that I don't think we've actually seen before, even under Kinnock. So it's kind of business as usual going backwards, but it's not business as usual. Where it is business as usual, I guess, is that Labour has always, in one way or another, tried to suppress any whiff of socialism. And that's what Blair did, and that's what Starmer's doing. It's just that they're doing it differently because the context is different. But we can't actually expect any different outcomes, which very entirely with the pessimism of Will at the end of his talk. That's it.
Thanks very much, Janet, and thanks to both of you. Really interesting contributions. So I'm going to kick off the discussion from the floor, as it were, in a moment. I should have mentioned at the start of the meeting we've had a few apologies for tonight. So regular comrades, Nick Rack, Soraya Lawrence and Chris Strafford have sent apologies for tonight's meeting. So I'm sure we'll see them at the next one, but they're having a well-earned break. If comrades can indicate they want to speak, we've got two comrades already. Just to remind you, Zoom hand if possible, that'd be much appreciated. And I'll call you in for 5 minutes. And 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I'll call you in for 3 minutes, and then once you hit 3 minutes, I will tell you to wrap it up. So to start, we've got John.
Hello, can you hear me? I think I didn't see the conference. I couldn't be bothered, but I know Nick has said in some of his articles on the website that Labour is not dead, but I think it's dying. Where I live in Wisbech, a market town in Cambridgeshire, which has got a population, including the villages, of 35,000, there's no Labour Party. Steve Barclay, the health minister, is the local MP. He's got a majority of 30,000. It shows you how bad things are here. I think my view is after the next year election, the Labour Party will go the way of the French Socialist Party, which gets 5% of the vote in elections. Also, Tony Blair said a couple of years ago that the Labour Party will only be safe when 300,000 people have left. Well, I think that's what's happened. That I know there's a figure of 200,000, but I would say it's more like 300,000. Regarding what Will said about the housing, it's good to read if you can get hold of a copy. Engels, the housing question. He had a debate with, I think it was either a German or French socialist about home ownership. And the thing is, in Engels' day, 90% rented. And I think that's what the future lies, apart from a few middle-class people who can sort of be the bank of mum and dad for their kids and grandchildren. I think in the short term, what's happening with the Labour Party is it's become like the German SPD. It's just an alternative to the Tories. But the last thing I'd like to say is I don't think the ruling class will give up on the Tories. That they cannot, but the Tories will not be replaced by the Labour Party, no matter how right wing. And if Starmer thinks he can replace the Tories as the party of capital, he's wrong. They'd stick the knife into him if they wanted to. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Well under time there. So yeah, it's really interesting, by the way, comrades, to hear, of course, how this translates into your situation locally. Obviously, maybe many of you will have been active in the Labour Party at some point, or still are potentially, and will have things to say about what it means for you locally and what your experience of these developments is going to be. So that'll be interesting to hear as well. So next up, I've got Minnie. Go ahead, Minnie.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, we're in Liverpool, Graham and I, so obviously didn't go to the Labour conference because I'm not in the Labour Party anymore. I was in briefly under Corbyn. I agree with what the speakers have said. A lack of democracy is really, really shocking. The way they're closing down free speech, and one word that you weren't allowed to use at the conference, I think they were wiping out the word apartheid when it came to Israel-Palestine in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign stall. I went on a big march for Save Liverpool Women's Hospital, which ended up at the conference. But you don't get, if you're a big demo, you don't get to go anywhere near the conference. The security was incredible. And we're kettled into a small area, which is the other side of the dock. So you'd have to cross water, you know, where you'd have to walk around to get there. Also, I would say did they have a GB newsstand inside conference? Amazon sponsored multiple events, I believe, and they said growing and unlocking product through business collaboration. That was Amazon's statement. Also, the most exciting part of the conference for me was the biodegradable litter. I was really excited by that. But I noticed that how the media closed that down. And whenever they talked about that guy was actually shouting, "We demand a people's house. We demand a people's house." And as he was being dragged off, he was saying, he drew the attention to the fact that we don't have a democracy. He was shouting, "We're in jeopardy." And nobody discussed that their movement, People for Democracy, or something, I can't remember what it's exactly called, they come out of Just Stop Oil, There was no discussion at all. And the Mirror did some sort of puff piece saying, well, that just proves that Starmer's going to be a leader because look how he reacted to the glitter. Wasn't he great? I've got it written down here somewhere about how he reacted to it. But oh yeah. Starmer reveals leader fit for next government because of the way he reacted to that glitter thing. It's absolutely shocking. It's just, there's also something that Rachel Reeves is supporting. Just give me a second. And that is, she wants to, I'll just look at it now. Yeah. So Rachel Reeves wants to guarantee in law that any government making significant changes to tax and spending would be, quote, subject to an independent forecast of its impact from the OBR. So in other words, if you elect a government in an unelected Quango, quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation they didn't vote for, is going to have a say. So, because any new tax and spending will be in law, and the Office of Budget Responsibility would have to have a say on that. I agree with Will, the word Stalinist, and the way that Starmer has closed down the Labour Party, free speech. There's no free speech. I believe there's a lot of nepotism. Wes Streeting's partner is now a candidate to be a MP in one area. I was hearing how rich Labour Party MPs are now. I did have a look at the Transform had a burial for Labour Party. They had a funeral. They held a funeral for the Labour Party, and they went into just near where the entrance is, and there were so few people on that. And there were a lot of people, sort of city slicker suits around the conference, and they were laughing. They were laughing at this protest that said Labour Party is dead. There were.
Thanks, Minnie. I'm going to.
That's it. Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minnie. So I'm going to keep taking hands for people who want to come in and discuss. I'm going to chair myself in very briefly, but I'll watch out for everyone raising hands and then tell you who's next. So chairing myself in, I thought it was a really interesting point raised by John that the ruling class won't give up on the Tories, and I think that's quite insightful, and the question will be, I think, how long assuming Labour does win the election, how long the ruling class will use Starmer's Labour Party as a convenient second 11 before it thinks that the Tories have laundered their public image enough to be drafted back in and get the first 11 back in. I think that's a really important question because, of course, the Starmer, as Will and Janet both identified, Starmer's Labour Party is offering people nothing, and it's telling people quite boldly to expect nothing from them. And so I think in that situation, it's not by any means a given, even if they win the next election, that they would win the one after that. Because, of course, if they're not doing fundamentally anything to change people's material conditions and the situation that they're in, then people's patience may run very thin very quickly indeed. So I think that is something to think about as well, especially when thinking about how communists should be approaching this election and how we should be putting forward our own politics and our own demands. But I'll leave that point hanging for the moment. So calling in comrades to contribute or to ask a question. I'm not seeing any hands up at the minute, but perhaps, Will, I'll call Kate in and then I'll come to Will. So Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
We can.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the thing to raise my hand. Sorry, which thing is it? I can't see it.
It's at the bottom under reactions, but don't worry, I saw you
reactions.
waving, so I'll
Yeah,
see that one as well.
okay, yeah. My mind was totally blank, and then a few ideas came to me because I didn't actually watch this conference. I wasn't feeling very well, and I just thought it would make me worse. But just what I feel about the Labour Party, I suppose. I mean, locally, we had this meeting locally about the movement for a new mass workers' party, and we had some people speaking from New Socialists, Socialist Labour, and their CLP was, I don't think it was maybe shut down, but it couldn't operate anymore. And they're active socialists in the community, and their view is really that you can't do anything until after the general election. But they've been working for a long time in the community, these people, and they got an Asian socialist man, Mehmed Musa, elected in a by-election, and they explained how that was done. And it was done through the work in the community, addressing material and social needs, but also putting forward a political program. And it was very impressive and moving. He wasn't actually able to come because he's been elected as a councillor, an independent councillor. So I think a lot of people at that meeting that came, that I know, felt this Labour is really hopeless. There isn't anything we can do but support a movement for change, and with the eventual arriving at the point of a mass party, but we would maybe do that by standing independence. And that model that was presented to us was good. But another meeting I went to, which was about the binmen's strike, which had been won in Thanet. There was a guy there just convinced that if we get Labour in, we will be able to force them to change. But I don't believe this, because when Tony Blair was elected, I was very active as a disabled person, and we were trying to take the thing about the change the thing about forcing disabled people into work through this test, which is modelled on insurance companies, and which has progressed to kill loads of disabled people. And we met with politicians and stuff. And when we got in, it was exactly the same as what the Tories had put forward. And the first day Blair was elected in the Sun, he was demonising people who were sicky cheats, in inverted commas, and he went on to do all these other terrible things. So I think it's even worse now. And kind of the third thing I feel is that the level of blatant racism in the Labour Party is so shocking. And I believe there was a protest by Black socialist activists about what's happened to Diane Abbott and the treatment of Black people in the Labour Party, Black MPs and other people at the Labour Party conference. I don't know how that went, but I was really grateful for that. I wish I could support it, you know. And also, you know, we're all aware of what's happened about Palestine, and they're just a kind of shameful abuse of the Holocaust, and the fact, you know, the Jewish people who died in concentration camps, that being twisted with this kind of smearing of people with anti-Semitism, and just the total shutdown of free speech. I actually find this terrifying. And, you know, the treatment of Black women MPs like Absama Begum, for instance, I think that she's been now demonized. I can't remember exactly what it is, for tweeting her support for Palestine. I just kind of feel no hope for the Labour Party at the moment. I don't know if in some way it can be reclaimed and changed. I wish it could be, because it is a mass party of working class people. You know, there are still people in the party. I don't know whether they'll vote for Labour, but as I say, there are people I've spoken to who have this kind of blind faith, you know, that it's better than the Tories. That's not what I think. I hope this is not too garbled. That's the end really of what I've got to say.
No, that was perfect, Kate, and that was a really interesting question, I think, for everyone to chime in on, because of course I think, without wanting to assume too much, most of the people here would feel that what Labour's offering is pretty hopeless. But what's interesting is to think about the people that we know, the people that we work with, the people who we encounter in our daily lives. You know, how much is that view shared by them? What's the general take on it out there, as it were? And I think that that's a really important question to consider. So I'm going to take Peter next. And then I've got Janet with her hand up, so I'll call Janet back in. But anyone who hasn't contributed next yet, you're really most welcome. And it can be a contribution, a question, a thought out loud. Please, by all means, chime in. So, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My first time, so I'm breaking my cherry. But I think we've got to be careful that we don't write the Labour Party off, because it's still a site of struggle, and it's still the trade unions are still involved in a big way within the Labour Party, and they do still get policies that they want through, even despite the machinations of the Starmer regime, because they got the policy through about renationalisation of energy and the railways, even though, as you quite rightly say, Starmer did a Callaghan and said, I'm not taking any notice of that. But the pressure will be on. And the other one was Rayner saying that they were going to, within 100 days of the next government, they were going to repeal some of the trade union laws, especially the latest ones that the Tories have brought in. And they were going to increase or bring in rights for representation, gig economy workers having proper sick pay and all that sort of stuff. And I think this is a place to watch, because if the Labour Party actually wins the next election, they are going to be put under pressure by the trade unions, because they've given cast iron guarantees to them about these withdrawal of these laws. And if they don't do it, there is going to be a lot of trouble within the trade unions. There could theoretically be disaffiliations. My union, ASLEF, only just avoided a disaffiliation motion at the previous conference. So, this is something that Starmer is going to have to watch very carefully. The other point I'd like to make is the fact that what is happening in the Middle East at the moment, and the absolutely disgraceful statement coming from a human rights lawyer that international law basically doesn't matter, that the Israeli government have a blank check, and that the withdrawal of essential services and medicines and things from the population in Gaza was a correct thing to do, which is against international law. And I find it quite amusing, really, when I can't remember what the actual name of it is, but the International Committee of Briefs, basically, that look at this sort of stuff, was putting out a statement saying that people need to remember that they can be charged with war crimes or complicity in war crimes as individuals. And all of a sudden, Starmer started to wobble a bit and make a bit of a backtrack on what he said. Oh, I think they can have some water. I think it was his reaction to it. So they're not impervious to pressure. And I think to write the Labour Party off is a dangerous thing. What we've got to do is those that are left is actually work within the trade unions and what is left in the Labour Party to try and change things. It's a hard job, but it's there. It shouldn't be completely wrote off. The other point to be made is the left outside the Labour Party, pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And if they think there is no challenge whatsoever at the moment, there's people running around like headless chickens, setting up all these different types of groups. And in my view, it's a complete waste of time. It's not going to go anywhere. If they try and get another Labour Party Mark II or Mark 22 or whatever it is, that's not going to solve the problems. There's got to be some reality about it. So anyway, thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Peter. Covered a lot of ground there. Yeah, I think probably the statement you're referring to was from the International Bar Association. Hardly a sort of progressive or left-wing bastion, but as you say, it gave quite an even-handed statement, not very much historical context, but said that civilian populations should be shielded from harm, which is, as you say, more than Keir Starmer, the noted human rights lawyer, could muster on television. So I'm going to chair in Janet next.
Okay. I think it's really responding a bit to quite a few people, but what Kate was saying about the response to Labour from, outside kind of bubbles that most of us are in one way or another, or in the Labour Party. But I think within the Labour Party as well, there are some contradictions really about what might happen to Labour support amongst different groups. And I think, 2 weeks ago, I would have said that, somebody was saying, I think it was Aaron Bastani, who, at least was there, even if we think he's a bit of a prat. But he was at the conference, I think, that within the conference hall, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm on the basis of we're going to win. And that enthusiasm was coming clearly from, the Starmer cult, the right wing, but it was also coming from a group of particularly constituency members who I wouldn't have thought were really Starmer, fans, but they were going along with stuff. So, for example, it was clear that Starmer didn't want Brexit to be debated. He didn't want PR to be debated, and the pressure to debate those were coming not from the left, but from, Alistair Campbell, from Kinnock, and they weren't debated. But a lot of people in that hall would have wanted them to be debated, and they didn't make a fuss. However, I think the last week has changed things, or will change things, and I think what Peter was saying about Palestine will change things. And if you think about, and this is the wider support, it's support within the membership, but also, Guardian readers, if we're going to stereotype people, I don't want to do that, but generalize people, the kind of nice middle class, vote Labour, nice liberals who think they are, morally superior to everybody else, and they probably are in many ways. But I think that kind of support will be ebbing from Labour. I don't know will they vote Green? I don't know, and I'm generalising. And also, clearly there's going to be an impact on Black and ethnic groups and Muslims in particular, who are going to be, I think, so horrified by what's happening. I'm Jewish. I can't believe what Labour are doing. I can't believe what they're saying. And I'm Jewish. If I was Muslim, I will never vote Labour, I think, till I'm dead. But if I was a Muslim, my God, I wouldn't vote for them. So I think that there are kind of shifting sands here, apart from the fact that Labour are saying every day, they say they withdraw from what were fairly weak commitments, they're withdrawing from them. So on social care, social care has been a major row in every government for the last 30 years, and it's never been sorted. And they've come out this week or last week saying, well, it's not a priority. There are a lot of people invested in reforming social care. So the more they do this, I think they're alienating different kinds of voters. And I think they're starting to alienate some of their more loyal, though not enthusiastic, Starmer supporters. And I wasn't saying Labour was dead. I don't think Labour's dead. Frankly, I wish it was. But it isn't dead. I don't think it is. I think the Labour left at the moment is dead. And what Peter was saying about the left outside the Labour Party is true, but it's even more true of the left within the Labour Party. They are silent, basically.
Thanks very much, Janet. So there's still plenty of time for anybody who hasn't spoken yet to do so. So Ethan, Andreas, John, Gary, by all means, raise those hands if you have anything that you'd like to contribute, and I'll make sure to chair you in. What I'm going to do in the meantime, while you're having a think, is I'm going to chair John back in, and then I might come to Will to pose a question to the meeting and move the discussion forward in a slightly different direction. So, John, go ahead.
I was interested in what Kate had to say. I think she said it was Newham, where there's an independent socialist group. The thing is, standing in general elections costs, I think it's £700 for the deposit. And if you don't get 5%, you lose it. But in local elections, all you need is 2 signatures and you're on the ballot paper. And I think that is where socialists should stand in local elections. It's like in Wisbech in the May elections, out of 9 seats, Labour only stood 1 candidate. Where I live in Wisbech, it's all independents, but most of those independents are ex-Tories. So, but what I'm getting at is we need something more than just standing as independents. We need a socialist name, and I'm not talking of Tusk, which is a front for the SPU, all right, the Socialist Party in England and Wales, but because I think any association with the trade unions, no matter how much people support the nurses and all the rest of it, trade unions are not popular. And that's where why Tusk gets hardly any votes in elections. What we need is a name that is registered with the Electoral Commission so that socialists can stand in elections and not under some sort of Bob Crow legacy called Tusk. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Right, so I'm not seeing any more hands raised right now, so I'll return to Will.
Yeah, just Peter, we're going to be having and everybody actually, we're going to be having a discussion in a fortnight that's going to be led by a socialist in the Labour Party who argues that people should stay and fight inside the Labour Party. And we're going to be debating that out. So you'd be most welcome to that, as would everybody else. I mean, the question really comes from the point that Janet was making, which is there is a nagging doubt in the back of my mind anyway. I mean, it's following the Labour Party conference and what happened there. Does everybody think Labour's going to win? Okay. We've got 3 no's there. Could one of you explain why? Why you think that?
Well, I never thought they were. I think there's more likely to be a hung parliament. I'm not saying I don't think Starmer won't be Prime Minister. I don't think I've ever thought they would win a majority when it came to it. There's a lot of Tories who've stayed at home in by-elections. Are they going to stay at home when it comes to the general election? Probably not. And there's a lot of other things like boundary changes. So, and as I said, I think Labour is going to lose some support from the kind of left liberal. I mean, where I live, the Greens are the main opposition. They're going to do really well in the local elections. They always do when Labour are anywhere near power. I don't think they're not going to win the seat in Norwich South, but they're going to do damn well, I think. So I haven't changed since the conference. I think I've always thought that, but who knows? I don't know.
Thanks, Janet. John, what do you reckon?
I agree with Janet that it'll be a hung parliament. I think the last week has changed things. I think the reaction of Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak, and Sir Keir Starmer in giving full support to the Israeli government, they've made a big error. It will just inflame revolution in the Middle East. I haven't been able to follow what's been happening in Egypt or Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, but and Saudi Arabia. Those countries could just go up in flames because the governments, they don't want the Palestinian refugees from Gaza because they know that they ferment revolution in their countries they'd go to, like Saudi Arabia. The other thing I was going to say is the Tories, I think, like the right-wing Tories, like Suella Braverman and Liz Truss, have got the measure of Starmer. They think he'll only be in for one term and then they can come back. This was behind Boris Johnson's thinking that he could come back. But at the moment, Liz Truss thinks she could come back, and you got Suella Braverman. And the thing is they've got the measure of Starmer. But I think I've lost my track. Sorry.
All right, John. If it comes back to you, just stick your hand up again. We'll chair you back in. So, is there anyone else who would like to contribute either thoughts on the outcome of the next election, any kind of trends that you see, or any other points that have been raised? By all means, raise your hand. I think I'm going to abuse my privileges as chair briefly in that case. I think one thing that will be quite interesting and quite determinative is what happens in all of the constituencies that were formerly known as the Red Wall, long-standing Labour constituencies, which the prevailing narrative was that they lent their votes to Boris Johnson in 2019, and I think it will be very interesting to see what happens there, because by all accounts, a lot of the spending that was promised to areas like that simply isn't materialising. There's no particular suggestion, however, that for all that the Labour Party are trying to capitalise on the death of the levelling up agenda, there's no particular evidence, as far as I could see, that they were really putting forward any counter proposals to make it a reality or to breathe life back into it. And so I think it will be very interesting to see there what happens with these voters who perhaps the habit of many decades of voting Labour with arguably that some implications for their sort of collective politics and their notions of class solidarity and being against the Tories at least, that has been broken or at least suspended in the last election. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with those electorates and to what extent we see a return to the Red Wall and to a return to traditional loyalties. So I'm going to chair in Kate and then Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say something else about that meeting that we had. It was about the trade unions. And I'm really glad, I can't remember who said now, but they thought the trade unions are really going to fight back if Labour didn't deliver. Not that they've promised a lot, really. But we invited a representative from the striking bin workers to come and speak at that meeting, just to really tell us what had been happening, because they were in dispute with the Labour Council. They actually won. And then because they won in Canterbury, it emboldened other people to, in Thanet and other areas, to go on strike. And I think they've actually all won their demands as well. So it was a victory. So I went to that meeting to celebrate the victory of the Canterbury workers. And there was a speaker from the union there. And I said, I've been trying to invite someone to come and speak just for 5 minutes at our meeting. And he said, well, it's gone to region. And I can't come because I'd lose my job and I wouldn't be allowed. And region dictates what we say. And well, I remember also talking to some people on the ASLEF picket line, and they were saying to me, well, I said, I think Keir Starmer was really awful. And they said, well, Labour gives us a voice and we won't have a voice without Labour, really. So that's kind of two experiences I've had about the unions, that there is this kind of, even though they see what Labour's doing, there's this kind of undying loyalty. And we know that I think it's only the Bakers Union that have actually disaffiliated. So that's why I kind of felt pessimistic about what would happen. But anyway, I'm glad that someone thinks it's going to be different. So just giving those points from my own experience, really.
Thanks very much, Kate. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just 2 points, really. There's a by-election taking place in the northwest, Tamworth, and it's a Tory seat, but it's going to be very interesting to see what the vote is, how well Labour does or not. They're actually panicking a bit. They've sent out an email encouraging everyone to go there because they think it's going to be very tight. But I think that as far as the red wall seats are concerned, I think it's not a foregone conclusion they're all going to turn Labour at the next election. The response that our comrades have been having in Lancaster and Fleetwood constituency is interesting. In they seem to be getting a lot of support on the doorstep, but there is support for the Greens. The Greens have quite a large contingent. In fact, they run Lancaster Council up here. The other thing I'd mention is, which caused a furore just before the Labour conference, was the debacle of HS2, where the Prime Minister pulled the plug on the Manchester leg of HS2, having previously pulled the one on to Leeds. And this makes the project a joke. It's a complete joke now. It's not going to do what it was promising to do, which would open up paths on the West Coast Main Line, because obviously it's not going to Manchester. In fact, it's going to make things worse because they're going to prioritise the HS2 trains over the West Coast Main Line trains. The other thing is that we've had, it's very interesting, Trans-Pennine Express. We've actually had some renationalisation because Northern Rail and Trans-Pennine Express are now run by the government. And Trans-Pennine Express have been a marvellous train company, first group owned at the time. And the fact is that they've actually put into the sidings a whole tranche of brand new trains that they've taken out of service, reduced the timetables because they haven't got the capacity to train the drivers on these new trains. And it's in chaos up here in the northwest. The rail service and public transport as a whole is in absolute chaos. The only light at the end of the tunnel was Andy Burnham managing to get his B network going in Manchester on the buses. But again, I think that's becoming a bit of Inspector, I can't remember his name now, that guy that was on the buses, that television program. But yeah, I think, I've said before, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Labour is actually going to win the next election. I think they're odds on, but I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Peter. I'm going to, if there's no one else looking to come in right now, I'm going to chair Will back in again.
Right.
There
I remember being at Labour Party conference in 1996 amidst the kind of Blair tidal wave and giving out, I think I was giving out Labour briefing at the time. And somebody came up to me, I don't know, they were kind of in their 50s and they kind of buttonholed me and they went, "You are a dinosaur. That's what you are." And then they walked off. And at that time, it felt, I mean, in a way, this is kind of picking up some of what Peter was saying, it felt an impossibility to work in the Labour Party or to make it workable. But we're gonna be debating that, I think, next time. I mean, the reason why I posed that question is precisely because of the things that people have been bringing up about whether Labour can win. And I think the response you get from the Labour membership or the people in the conference hall, it's kind of a desperate desire for Labour to win. It doesn't matter what form of Labour it is. As long as Labour wins, the policies are almost irrelevant. It's like supporting a football team in a way. You know, and I've experienced that, and I've experienced that from Labour members. They'll forsake anything. Anything will be forgiven in order to get a majority Labour government. And it's very hard to hear that kind of point of view. But I do wonder, you know, because we're talking about, Janet was talking about policies being shredded. And this is before the manifesto. Yeah, and that's the point. What gets into the manifesto is what counts. And we have yet to see the manifesto. And I think at that point, the desire to get a Labour government in will overwhelm any progressive measures that the Labour Party might be able to offer, even the minor ones that they might be able to offer. And I'm not discounting unionisation of gig workers and all that kind of stuff, but they will wriggle out of any commitment they've got, and a wriggling will happen when as the manifesto is drawn up and published. And in that context, I think that, you know, they're going to demobilise the people in the CLPs who might work for them. There will be some people who go out. I mean, but it will be nothing like, I mean, I was chair of Chipping Barnet CLP, and during both the 17 and the 19 election, we had huge numbers of people just turning up to take part. And they demobilise all of these people. And I think that will be a significant factor. I think what's happening in Palestine will be a significant factor. I think also there is the issue about voter loyalty. What we've had in the last period is lots of people breaking from the traditional parties that they've voted for in different ways. And lots of vote swapping going on, and lots of people thinking it's okay to vote Green, or it's okay to vote something else other than the Labour Party. Red Wall, yeah. I mean, for me, Labour got the Brexit thing massively wrong, and its approach to it. But there was definitely, you know, people have learned not to vote for the Labour Party. And I think, as Janet says, Tories have a habit of sitting at home and going, we're just not going to bother and vote this time. But actually, when it comes down to it, they know how to defend their material interests. Yeah. And for a big part of that demographic, it's home owning, it's the triple lock. And it's actually not touching social care. Yeah. So I think that actually the Tories have Labour boxed in. And I think it's it's not highly likely that Labour will have a majority, I have to say, at this moment. And I think that, I should also add, I want Labour to win the election. Yeah, I want Labour to win the election, because if we don't get a Labour government, then politics will completely seize up on the left and will further disintegrate, I think. I think we need a Labour government. The working class need a Labour government. What we don't need is another period of Conservative rule. What may happen is we may get a coalition between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, which would be, you know, a very interesting political position to be in.
Thanks very much, Will. So we're coming up to 20 to 9 now. I'm going to want some time at the end just to tell everybody about the programme of meetings that's coming up in the coming weeks. So I'm going to ask for a last call for anybody who hasn't spoken yet, who'd like to come in and contribute. Now is the time. By all means, just raise either a virtual or a physical hand. I'd be more than happy to chair you in. Otherwise, I'm going to hand over, I think, to Janet first, if that's okay, to respond to points made and to sum up some of the discussion. And then, of course, Will, if you would like to come back in on the general discussion as well, that you would be more than welcome to do so. So anybody who would like to contribute who hasn't spoken, going once, going twice, no, right, over to you, Janet.
I've said an awful lot, so I'm not sure I should be saying anything really. Just picking up Will's point about he wants Labour to win. I guess emotionally, I don't want the Tories to win. I don't want Labour to win. I mean, I know there's no alternative unless we have your Labour Lib Dem pact, and that's no better really. But what Kate was saying, I find things about Labour quite frightening, and not just no better than the Tories, but because they want to outdo the Tories, they may be worse. And I certainly think in terms of foreign policy, it could be catastrophic. And stuff like PFI, PPPs, you know, I was a councillor for 18 years, a Labour councillor. I was a council leader, but I also then worked in a political think tank that at the time I joined was progressive Labour, turned into something else. I spent a lot of my time for a year or so working with the University of London, some people in there doing analysis of PFI and on hospitals particularly, which wasn't really my thing, but you know, it was so apparent. It wasn't just an ideological opposition to PFI. It was because people did very detailed work about looking at the contracts for hospitals, and every single thing that these people said came to pass. And we're stuck now with, you know, dreadful effects of those contracts, and not just the debt, but the continuing privatisation, the fact that contracts were fixed for, you know, 20, 30, 50 years. But so I'm not so sure, you know, the racism in Labour, the opportunist racism. I don't know if Starmer's a racist, but I do know he allows the most blatant racism to take place within the Labour Party. And I can't say that I want a party led by somebody like him and Lammy and Wes Streeting. I can't say I want them to win, in all honesty. So I'm not sure that well. The other thing I think about the next Labour government, if there is one, is the PLP will make the present PLP look like a revolutionary cadre, because they are, I think Minnie was talking about nepotism, you know, so Will Streeting's partner is a candidate in a good seat, but actually it is nepotism of a different way, because they've cloned Luke Akehurst and his shower. Nearly every single candidate, if Labour wins a large number of seats, is going to be horrendous. And, you know, they're not going to be pretending to be horrendous. These are horrendous right-wing careerists who will be in there for 5, 10, 20 years. And the thought of that I find appalling. And I think just one last point about the Red Wall. Clearly what happened in 2019 was dramatic, but it wasn't altogether surprising. I mean, it was because of Brexit, but that trend in a lot of those seats had been happening, the move away from Labour over what, 5, 10, 20 years. And it was, the catalyst was Brexit, but it doesn't mean to say that, you know, come the next election, what was the catalyst to people turning away from Labour hasn't gone away. And if they're not promising anything more than the Tories, then why would they vote Labour again? And I think, you know, if there's another year before the election, the Tories will be putting some more effort into the so-called levelling up agenda and channeling stuff to where they think it might make an impact, because they can do that. They can do what they want. So I don't know what I think really, but I just feel very depressed. I think it's what I think, basically.
Thanks, Janet. Will, any final remarks you want to come in with?
Yeah, just finally, I mean, I think I mean, it gives me no pleasure to say that I want the Labour Party to win with these people running it. But for me, the choice is between a slow death of Labour England, which will come about if Labour lose, and a much faster death of Labour England, which will come about, I think, if they win. And I know that we're going to be discussing it in a fortnight, but I think that poses questions about where we work and how we work. I have no doubt And I think we can see that there is a deep racism inside the Labour Party, and actually there always has been. But it's just re-emerged in a different form. And I think, you can see the attitude of the Labour leadership towards the Palestinian question is deeply racist, actually, is deeply racist. And in terms of their policy, and I think the reason why Starmer started backing off is because the lawyers were on the phone saying, be extremely careful. They've all been doing it in Western Europe, slightly altering what they were saying about what's going on in Palestine. The best thing I've read, I quite enjoyed this book, which was called The Starmer Project by Oliver Eagleton. And he just traces Starmer's rise to power. And Starmer's an organisation man. He's a vessel that will carry any ideas that will get him into power. It's that simple. And he will go with anything that gets him into power. So I think he's just seized his opportunity, and he is the willing helper of people that wanted to turn the Labour Party back to Blairist times. And they truly believe in their own strategy. And I think I agree with Peter that the left outside the Labour Party is, I think, to put it mildly, a bit shambolic and lost. And in that way, I think it mirrors the left inside the Labour Party. I think we're all inside the trade union. So I think the left as a whole is going to have to find a way through this particular political period in which we're in. And we need to work out how to keep people together when people are not being helped by, I think, Corbyn's present non-leadership. I think he's entirely absent. And I find that quite a depressing phenomena, that somebody who's so prominent is now so absent. So it's, I don't, we're living in really difficult times. And every morning you wake up and see the news and think, what fresh hell is coming through the door? But we have been through really difficult times in the past. And for me, one of the important things is that socialists and Marxists need to group together, talk together, debate, think our way through this process, think our way through how we're going to organise, think about questions of the left and democratic organisation, and make sure we get it right. And use this period to do a lot of the thinking, because, I'm not sure we're going to have much impact between now and the general election. We need to work out some of these questions and think about strategy for getting us out of the position, and the working class out of the position that it finds itself in.
Thanks very much, Will. And thanks very much to Will and Janet for excellent contributions, introductions and contributions throughout the meeting. And thanks very much to everybody who contributed. If this was your first time, I very much hope to see you at the next discussion. I wanted to just take a few minutes just to tell everybody about talking about socialism, particularly for those who are new and are encountering us for the first time. So as has been said, we've been running these fortnightly Zoom meetings since March of this year, and we've covered a range of topics from the war in Ukraine, the new initiative to found a new party called Transform. That was something that we discussed. Public ownership, where the left is going after the end of Corbynism. Lots of different topics have been discussed, and we've got some interesting ones coming up as well. So in 2 weeks' time, Will mentioned that Steve Forrest, who's a regular participant of these meetings, and he's somebody who's active in the Labour Party, he's going to be making the case for why Marxists, communists, socialists should be active in the Labour Party. Obviously, it's a key point of contention, and he will be presenting the case, and it will be, I'm sure, a very interesting discussion with lots of different views expressed. So that's in 2 weeks' time, so 30th of October. So mark your diaries for that. Then 2 weeks after that, we're going to be discussing the latest developments in Israel and Palestine. We haven't yet confirmed the speaker, but discussions are ongoing, and it's going to be someone very knowledgeable on the topics. That will be one that you really won't want to miss. So that will be then on the 13th of November. So a lot of interesting discussions coming up. I've put some links in the chat for our website where you can find out more about us and the statement that we've recently agreed, setting out our fundamental ideas that we all share. And there's also, of course, a Facebook group and a YouTube channel where the recording of this and all of the other meetings will be uploaded in due course. So with that, I'm going to thank everybody for coming along tonight, end the meeting slightly early, and wish everyone a good evening, and hope to see you next time in 2 weeks' time.